Hello, I'm Russ Kostrich. I'm the iShares Chief Investment Strategist. I'm standing here in the lobby of the iShares BlackRock World Headquarters and here to talk about global inflation. We thought the big money map in back of me would be an apt setting. So what I'd like to kind of go through over the next few minutes is what is the outlook for global inflation? We've just left a period where for the first time really since the 1930s, investors, central bankers, politicians were more worried about deflation. In other words, falling prices than inflation, rising prices. Now, the good news is we're ending that period. We've actually seen price stability in most of the developed world. In many emerging market countries, we've actually seen inflation pick up by too much. So given this backdrop, what is the outlook going forward? What should we expect on a global basis in inflation, both for developed markets, also emerging markets? Let's start with the United States. Right now, the U.S. is actually starting to see a stabilization of inflation from the historically low levels we had in 2010. So last year, we actually saw core inflation, which strips out food and energy prices, drop to the lowest level since the 1950s. Today, inflation has been heading higher, although not to the level that would alarm central bankers. So headline inflation is now back over 3%. Most of that increase is due to rising energy prices. The core inflation, which strips out food and energy, is rising about 1.3%. Still a little too low for central bankers' comfort, but an improvement of what we had last year. Going forward, our expectation is that as the economy normalizes, as the labor market recovers, as factory utilization starts to recover, as bank lending increases, we will see a gradual but persistent increase in inflation over the next 12 to 15 months. Now, there are already parts of the developed world where inflation is above the level that central bankers would like to see. The best example of that in the near term is actually the United Kingdom. So currently today, inflation in the UK is about 4%, down from about 4.4% recently. There is a good possibility that inflation will reaccelerate in the UK over the coming months for a variety of reasons. And it does illustrate the problem that even though we have slow growth in many developed market countries, there are a number of factors from rising food, rising energy, rising taxes that are causing inflation to start to pick up. Now, in emerging markets, this is already more of an issue. If we look at China, India, Brazil, many of these countries are already struggling with an inflation rate that's well above the comfort level of central bankers. So starting in China, if you look at the Chinese inflation right now, it's above 5%. Much of that increase is being driven by changes in food prices. And this is particularly problematic for emerging markets like China. If you think about what people spend money on in the United States, only a relatively small portion of the consumption basket goes to food. It is a very different story in emerging markets. If you're a consumer in China, you spend about 35%, about 35 cents of every dollar on food. In India, it's 45%. So if food prices are rising, if commodity prices are rising, by definition, you have inflation. And rising food prices are complicating the job of the Chinese central bank. Now, we do expect inflation in China to start to decelerate in the back half of the year, but it's already proved more resilient than many people thought. This is even more of a problem in India. Currently, right now, India has an inflation rate of about 9%. And one of the reasons India's inflation rate is so high is that the central bank in India, unlike places like China and Brazil, was fairly slow to start to raise rates and drain reserves from the banking sector. The net effect of this is, as they say, the central bank was behind the curve on inflation. As a result, we think in India, this will be one of the last countries where the inflation rate really starts to fall. And then finally, let's take a quick look at Brazil, one of the largest emerging markets. This is a country with a history of inflation, and investors are particularly concerned about it because of that history. So currently, inflation in Brazil is over 6%. This is well above the central bank's target rate of about 4.5%. We do think that inflation will start to fall in the back half of the year, but pay attention to credit growth. One of the reasons that inflation in Brazil has been rising so quickly is you're seeing a boom in consumption fueled by a rise in personal credit. The government needs to mitigate that, to moderate it, in order to bring inflation under control. So in an environment where inflation is generally on the rise to greater or lesser extents depending upon the country, what are some of the things that investors can do to protect purchasing powers? One of the instruments, InflationLinked Bonds, give investors the opportunity to get a real rate of return, which is guaranteed by the government. The way this works, it's a bond, but unlike a typical bond where the principal is simply what you invested, in an inflation-linked bond, the principal will adjust as inflation rises. The advantage here is that while you have a lower rate of interest than you would have on a traditional bond, your principal will continue to rise as inflation rises. This is a very useful instrument to help investors hedge the inflation risk over the long term.